Hello and welcome to Fintech Chatter, the show where I connect with fintech leaders for a bit of a chat. I'm your host, Dexter Cousins, and the founder of Tier 1 People, the executive search firm committed to helping high-growth fintech ventures hire exceptional people. Today's guest is a bit of a different one. I'm joined by the Chief Commercial Officer of Pier, an Ethereum staking business. Jake Denny, welcome to your Fintech Chatter debut.
Thank you. Appreciate you having us.
Yeah, look, I had to get you on. I think first of all, because we love showcasing Aussie fintechs that nobody's heard about that are doing really cool stuff, but also that I thought, a little bit of a diversion for us. Such an incredible topic and a one where I learned so much catching up with you for a coffee a few weeks back that I thought I had to share it with our listeners. And I guess at a time as well where kind of crypto keeps having these kind of waves where it hits the news, and each time it gets a little bit further along the kind of adoption curve, to the point where I'm kind of convinced that the worlds of TradFi and DeFi are kind of on a rapid collision course. But before we kind of go into what you do, maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and just a little bit about exactly what it is Pier 2 do as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Pier 2, so working with all of our partners on the commercialization side. So that ultimately looks like they are holding a significant amount of digital assets that can be staked, so proof of stake assets like Ethereum, Solana, and a host of others. They are looking to earn rewards for the work that needs to be done to secure the blockchains. Pier 2 specialise in doing that work operationally on the chain to secure them, and the rewards that get paid for that with the stake that gets put up by the client ultimately goes back to the client. It's all non-custodial, so they always retain control. We don't ever do that. We just perform the duties, and so the business is largely based on scale. But it's sort of like people have referred to Ethereum staking in particular, sort of like an internet bond.
Right. So one of the things that really kind of fascinated me is when you think of something like Ethereum staking, you're thinking of some kind of crypto native who's been a conspiracy theorist, right? Who wants to make a little bit of money. But it's a huge business. You're talking about institutions, corporates who are your customers. Like when did you guys kind of notice that this was a huge commercial opportunity and it moved way beyond the kind of digital native origins of crypto?
Yeah, look, I think we've been around. So the company was established in 2018.
Wow, so like Ethereum was what, 2015?
That's right, yeah, exactly. So, and we all had, I joined the company in 2020, so a bit over a year after the company was actually started. But we're all sort of closely following the Ethereum roadmap for years before that point. And I think if you were paying close attention to what was happening there and what sort of the vision was, and then other technologies supporting it, they talked about this idea of proof of stake, moving away from mining, similar to Bitcoin, and proof of work to this proof of stake. And so there were iterations, there were designs, there were things being discussed in time, but for our business in 2020 when ETH2 launched or the Beacon chain launched, we started staking. So we had been staking since really the beginning with Ethereum on that journey, and in between we're doing other things. But the interesting point for us, or where it made the most sense for us as a business line, and then ultimately the core focus of the business, was in talking to some potential large customers for the future. It was pretty clear that they weren't going to participate in this function of staking, even though it was securing the chains, because at that point you could put your Ethereum into stake and earn rewards, but you didn't know when you could get it out.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty scary if you've got a bunch of capital and you don't know when you're going to get it back. There's no term, and that wasn't because they were unorganized. They just needed to wait for the breakthroughs in the technology to be able to get them right, to ship them appropriately, and then confirm that sort of timeline. So yes, the hardcore crazy people who really believe in the technology were staking in the beginning.
Yeah.
That includes us.
Yeah.
And after, I guess, the safety net was in for, I can get it back out once I don't want to stake anymore. That was when the market opened up. And then from that point, which was sort of early, mid 2023, April 2023 to be precise, that has grown significantly in terms of interest. Who is looking at staking today is a very different person to who was looking at staking prior to, so.
And could you give us some kind of examples? Or?
Yeah, look, I mean, there are banks that are openly talking about using stablecoins and testing, the infrastructure that like this technology behind blockchain or crypto unlocks. In doing that, testing stablecoins, their own, others, they'll need to be able to pay the service fees to use the network, which is Ethereum, which requires, it's a metered system. The gas that you pay on Ethereum is for the transaction. So they'll have to have some, component of that, and so they might have some part of that asset, on treasury that they'll use for experimenting and R&D and purposes like that. So that's an edge case. We've got traditional asset managers and other sort of brokerage companies, people sort of operating in FX and CFDs and other more traditional sort of instruments are adding crypto as a line item and watching it soar. If you've got traders as customers in that business, they like volatility, they like to get an edge. Nothing sort of puts that more on steroids than this. It's just the maturity of the space has changed significantly. And so if there's a long thesis around a particular asset that can be staked, to not be then securing the chain and participating in the staking and benefit from that work and the rewards that flow would just be a massive missed opportunity for the investor. And so we're just seeing the demand on that grow so significantly, and that's an exciting part of the future of our business.
Awesome. Now, one of the things that I wanted to have a chat with you about is, I think, and it's it gets labeled or thrown at the industry time and time again as where's the use case.
Right.
And I wanted to have a chat with you about kind of, the differences between Ethereum, Solana, Bitcoin, just to understand, hey, like what is the use case for Ethereum, why you've gone down that path, and what it is that you see, kind of not just the immediate opportunity, but, if we work on a kind of thesis that essentially this is the money for the internet, what that actually means, and what you see kind of happening over this next decade or two.
Yeah, for sure. So I think
there's a lot packed in there.
There is, and I think it'd be remiss to not start with the OG Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin was a technological breakthrough. Preventing double spend was just not something that any other technology prior to that was able to do, and so peer-to-peer money transfers was sort of the original concept of what it could do. It's changed significantly in terms of what it does today relative to what it was proposing it could do. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't do it. It just means that people have found more value in the store of value through the 21 million cap supply of Bitcoin. And so the use cases changed somewhat around sort of core positioning, but as a technology, it introduced a lot in that early stage, where that sort of inspired Ethereum as a first smart contracting platform that was ultimately adopted and sort of has led the way there. And there are others, obviously, like Solana and a lot of others that are emerging, but Ethereum was the first. The promise of that is not so much that it is there to replace the financial systems or rails of the world, or it's really there, it serves a couple of purposes. So the first thing is you've got to understand the internet pretty well to really get sort of why Ethereum or why smart contracting platforms. And I spent a long time working on the internet-related technologies, some very early in their stages, some watching them develop, some taken advantage of, some completely vanished because they were just no longer relevant. And I think the very early parts of the internet was, yes, you could use the internet, as DARPA sort of pushed out, but it was like you could use the internet, but it can't be sort of cash-based, like as in you can't have, and that's why we have credit card forms. So it couldn't be sort of like bank-enabled at the time. And so we have a really clunky ecosystem around how you conduct e-commerce, say.
Yeah.
And so this idea that you go and you look for a shirt, you add it to your bag, you add a pair of jeans, you go to the checkout, and at that point you've got to then enter your credit card details in open form, they get saved, all the details, then they get hacked, all your details gone, your credit card's hacked, your bank's blocked. Like, this just happens time and time again. I can't tell you how many legitimate major companies have had my information hacked. Qantas was the most recent, and it's deplorable, quite frankly. Like, that's a big business for Qantas in their data business, and having that sort of just leak and then tell you not much initially and then a lot after the fact, at that point it's too late. And I've since had calls and all sorts of things. Now that's just one example. I don't want to pick on a company, but like, the company.
No, let's pick on them, right? Like,
well, look,
Medibank, Latitude.
Yeah, that's right.
Because those are them all, right?
And the thing is that there's no, like, in the US, this happens.
I was a customer in 2012, and they sent me a message to say, my information had been stolen. I'm like, well, one, it's old, so it's not relevant anymore. But two, like, why you still got it?
Well, yeah, that's a problem. Well, and I think there's the other problem in the data security side of things is, okay, somebody gets your Qantas frequent flyer information, maybe it's not that relevant. I mean, they could build a case around trying to steal your identity, for sure. That's pretty major in the US. That's probably not the most scary thing. I heard of one recently about in the fertility space where company was hacked for all their private information. Now that's getting into really sensitive information, and look, that, quite frankly, it's not fair. So I would say there's a couple of things there. The internet's just fundamentally broken in that the companies that are the biggest operators on that or participate with large businesses on it can't protect their information. They can't do anything about the hacking space. It's just really difficult to protect at this point. So I don't even necessarily blame them, but we can't trust them. And then two, I think there's the idea that just money sort of being a separate thing to how people sort of transact. Now, take those two concepts that underlie the entire backbone of, making sort of the internet valuable from a e-commerce or just economic perspective. Well, Ethereum has that from the gate directly, right? So information is money in this system, purely like actual digital, not like a little bit of digital here and a little bit of physical credit card entered here, like actual fully digital. And I don't think people are fully ready to comprehend what fully digital means.
Right.
And so that's a bit of a scary concept. And older businesses that have been around for 100 plus years, like banks, well, I mean, they've moved with a lot of different cycles over the time. So like, can't blame them for not being the first out of the gate, but things are changing and things are maturing. The other aspect of this is it doesn't need to be just money. So if the information requires permission on either what I'd want to share on a particular piece of information, who has access to it, and so that a third-party person can't just enter a system of a database and hack it and take all the information, because that would need to trigger a request on my side where I sign a transaction saying, yes, you can have access to this data. Because really, at the end of the day, like, why are they keeping your data for all this period of time? What were the terms of your data locker? Like, and these are just out of the gate piece of the technology that Ethereum can enable, and other chains, to be fair. And where that becomes really relevant is as more security is desirable for using the internet, and better systems like this can be plugged into it pretty easily, and that can also facilitate commerce, people will expect that they will use it more. Now, it doesn't need to be something that they see and visibly sort of notice. Stripe and other companies are going to make it invisible. PayPal, all of these things. You can have money in your bank account, connect it to your account, pay somebody. It's actually using stable coins, and the person receiving is willing to take either. The reality is, on the front end, you don't really that's preference based, and then in the middle of that, the transfer, international as well. If I'm in the US and I have my Bank of America account, and you're here in Australia, you have your Combank account, good luck trying to get the money to me through that system. Like, honestly, forget it. I've done it so many times. It's the worst thing ever, to the point that it's so impractical and expensive that you will then go and find a great company like TransferWise, now Wise, to do that sort of transfer. Right now, think about getting a Coinbase account set up, right, or anyone else that is enabling stable. Like, all of a sudden, you just can see this collapsing of, speed increases dramatically and the price collapses significantly. And because of the ease of it, we might pay each other more frequently, and so you're now sort of you're reducing the barriers of international trade on a peer-to-peer basis. So all these things go together, lead to block-based demand. The more demand on these networks creates more metered usage. User pays. Now, the other cool thing about this, which I think is really important after spending a large part of my career in digital advertising, media, and the architecture behind these trading systems, and we can get into that later, but that is a broken model. The fact that most of the internet is subsidized through ad dollars and ad spend is really not about getting the banner or the video or any of that in front of you. It's about harvesting your data.
This is kind of a really nice segue into a question I've been burning to ask, which is the thing that kind of I've always found. You talked about the example that you gave before, and I'm like, well, I'm a TransferWise and a Revolut customer, and I've been using them for years, so why would I bother with stable coins, right? It's the first question that I've got. Now, I remember listening to an interview with Vitali, right, and he was talking about how Ethereum and how it would work, and he went through this process, and I was like, but there's so much friction involved in that. Like, why are we doing this thing of converting fiat into something else? And it's kind of one thing that really struck me when we had the last crash and FTX went down, is that if you look at Bitcoin itself, nothing failed.
Nothing.
What failed was that people got greedy and tied it to the price of the US dollar, right? And my question is, in order for this to kind of technology, and the kind of concepts behind it, does it have to work independently of the fiat system, or is there another system that has to be created in order for, say, Ethereum to truly deliver on its promise?
That's a good question, and there's probably a couple of different ways to attack it.
And I've thrown a curveball
at
you, but it's something that I really kind of like.
I like it. Look, I think first thing is, why did FTX fail? Well, there was too much trust placed in it, in that people didn't know where their assets were. They were using an asset that they invented, a token they'd launched that they assigned a value, which was look, that was a fundamental human error, and a group of humans that were behind that. It wasn't a technical failure. I think things like Terra Luna that came before it, which was pretty damaging and probably led in large part to the outcomes of what eventually happened to FTX. That was, again, now the Terra Luna setup, where people say it's a stable coin, but it was not the same stable coin that people are referring to today that's captured in the Genius Act. It was a very different world, and it caused a lot of hurt. But the reason why it was so attractive is how much yield people can make from these loop sort of games. And that was greed. Again, not so much technology, because the oracle that was feeding that information sort of became unpegged, and everything sort of unwound, and everyone's trying to get their money. So the technology behind all of this ultimately did exactly what it was intended to do. It's a rules-based system, and it's codified, and it's immutable, which is the core difference between this technology and others. And so I'd say at no point did the technology ultimately fail. In this scenario, it was humans that failed, and they look. There's
the analogy I would use to compare the two different things, right, is if you look at the GFC and that crash, governments had to intervene.
Right.
And I think ultimately, if I look at those two different instances, and we got reminded of this just a couple of years back with Silicon Valley Bank, right, is that nobody intervened with Bitcoin. Nobody, right? And that just kept doing what it did. It kept churning out at the rate that it did. The wheels kept turning. If you look at the GFC, the wheels stopped. And basically governments around the world all had to intervene and pump in money, right? And I think that's kind of, for me, if I was to look at, hey, if you want to ever have a kind of, not necessarily a use case, but a test, kind of a fatality test of a system, the GFC, it didn't pass the test. Bitcoin, to me, did, right?
And look, I'll come back to the original question, but the thing on that specifically, which is interesting, is the GFC was a series of failures around the world. It sort of went like an earthquake into a tsunami,
was
right?
Like a man-made.
It was, but then what it did is it sort of the tide went out, and no one was really wearing any clothes, right? And that was a reality. So it wasn't like one thing caused everything. It was sort of a series of events that sort of demonstrated how fragile the system was, which is why Bitcoin was created, right? The difference between, say, something like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and Bitcoin being proof of work, so you've got a network of miners around the world that are agreeing to a set of rules, and then maintaining solving the problem with compute and energy to create that, and give it its integrity. And that's because countries all over the world are contributing to this international system. It's what makes Bitcoin so powerful, and why countries really want to be a participant in this. So not being a participant in that is to not be participating in fundamentally one of the most interesting new technology developments in what we understand to be money and transferring value. With Ethereum and others, where there is money living on top of them, as in like stable coins or other assets, including Ethereum itself as its own asset, but that's where the staking comes in, right? Like all those transactions have to be, attested to in new blocks and written in, and that's sort of why we exist. Is we're performing those functions on behalf of the network and all of the users on it, and across a series of others. And then again, that is companies all over the world. We're pretty proud that we get to, we're headquartered in Australia. I mean, we're a global team, but it's a pretty good story, we think, in terms of Australia being a participant in this global ecosystem of a decentralized network. So, and then back to your other question, and are there sort of like two parallel systems on a collision course, and like is one seeking to replace the other? Like I've been in multiple tech cycles through multiple industries, and I've watched them just get hammered by the technology because of they're not being ready, or not being open-minded, or not willing to sort of adopt a different mindset. And in every case, if they were case studies that somebody might write one day, but living on the front lines in those businesses and in those big orgs at the time that were, owner of industry, it was pretty clear what was happening and what you could have done at the time. And we just didn't do it because the incentives weren't there for us to do it. And so through a series of incompetence, lack of correct vision, taking new ideas from incumbents, acquiring sort of the right companies. There's a reason why Fox has existed and thrived for so many years, right? Like it's, they bought MySpace, everyone laughed at them, oh, what a failure, look at Facebook. Well, they still exist, and they're a massive news network, and they're relevant in all these different channels. Why? Well, between news and Fox, it's like what they've got going on. It's like I remember watching them as a fairly small operator at the time relative to the company I was with, and they've thrived. And so I think that's, and the fact that they're willing to pay so much at the time for a social media network, understanding where news was headed, to me was like, that's the right play. That's how you need to be thinking as a big org. So on the crypto, on like, is there a collision course? Well, there is, and I don't think they've got any motivation to do anything different unless there was a threat. And the threat doesn't need to be like, we're going to steal all your business. It's like, this might be better to use than what we currently offer as a company. Like, we take dollars and we store them, and we give people receipts on those things, and that acts as their credit system, and then we lend that out, and there's a whole ecosystem around banking infrastructure, which is really valuable, particularly for us in the West. Like, tap and go, you touch your watch in the US or Australia and other developed countries, and it's pretty easy. Like, why do I need a stablecoin? I don't really need one. There are other incentives of why I might want to participate in that, but I might not need it to the same extent that other countries do. Now, if I want to send money between countries, well, look, I've already explained that's kind of terrible. And even if I'm trying to move money between me and somebody else who's at a different bank than me, that kind of sucks too. Like using my email, like the amount of people.
And what I've found really interesting, right, is like the conversations have very much, like through the whole period of crypto, revolved around, and fintech did the same thing, right? It was all around the consumer. And then you realize kind of the alphas with Insto. And then if you look at, if we're talking about how much money moves between the world, it's not Stripe and MasterCard and Visa, it's between JP Morgan and the other banks, and they're moving like, 4 or 5 trillion dollars per day in just in trade deals. Now, if you look at the infrastructure that supports that, even from a software perspective, they're still using green screen MS-DOS systems, right? That kind of, and you've got these, like multi-billions of dollars of, stuff sat in a port where you need to get funding just to pay for the tax on it. Like look at what's happening in the US at the minute, right? With the tariffs and the chaos that introduces, because all of a sudden it's like, well, now I've got to get funding just to pay the tax or the tariff on that. And the infrastructure behind that takes you 90 days to sort that out, right? And so I think kind of for me, when I look at stable coins and I look at cross-border currencies and transfers, and for me, in smart contracts, for me, the promise is that, why do we need to do all that when you could run and there's been some really interesting stuff, I think, happening, earlier with R3 and, businesses like that, where they're applying supply chain logistics. You look at it and you go, hey, if I was the ATO, I would have been on it 10 years ago saying, hey, how do we use this as GST? Instead of kind of getting paid every 90 days, why don't we make it on the transaction, right? You think what that does for a government, right? And its funding. So for me, there's like so many use cases that, particularly from Ethereum, I think that I just go, wow, like why is it taking so long to, and I think it's partly as well, kind of observing the conversations are all about policy and regulation rather than, look guys, imagine if you could do this, right? What that would mean for you. That's what you would do with a customer, right? But when it comes to government and kind of politicians, we kind of seem to just be talking about policy when really what they're interested in is how do we get more funding and how do we get more votes?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like JP Morgan has all this money moving internationally with their counterparties in different countries, and money does move at size, and it's moving outside of this crypto system for the large part. And I saw something today which was like a total miss on this as well, of like, what's the actual use case? Crypto's worth all this money, and what does it actually do? Give me an example. And I mean, look, if you were demanding that when Nokia, the Motorola Razr was running like feature phones and everyone's buying them still, and they couldn't do any of the things, and I had to declare that then and declare what the market value of the future of the smartphone market could be when they weren't that smart and not many people were using them for that. And then you have the iPhone today, which just as the value, you wouldn't have been able to pick the value of the entire market, total addressable market, and compare it to Apple's. On that point, right? Like, so I put a post up the other day and I was saying, hey, look, kind of the general consensus between founders of my network is, been building for 10 years. If this could start again today, they wouldn't do any of the things that they did, right? And somebody put up a post of the Nokia guy going, oh, we did everything right, and yet we didn't win. And I think they also started as a gumboot company. Yeah,
exactly. And tree fellas, right? So, and I think this is kind of what people forget, right? Or they go, and they'll talk about the Kodak thing. You go, but Kodak might have developed the digital camera, but they were a chemical processing business, not a software computer business. And I think what you've seen with Apple, and the irony of it is, kind of Apple usurped Nokia and they didn't see it coming. And the same thing's happening to Apple now with AI. They've completely dropped the ball on it. And it's like, we're going to be using these same examples. And I think kind of, it's a bit like, nobody's lamenting, how VHS, kind of didn't get on the streaming wave. And I think this is kind of the real interesting thing that we're seeing with the technologies, right? And why, for me, Ethereum's like, if you're going to make a play, like to me, that is, you kind of, if you're going to build infrastructure for a digital age, you build it with that, as the, kind of the financial infrastructure, right? The pipes and plumbing.
Yeah, and I think, coming back to that point of like money moving between these, major financial organizations around the world, the thing that you've got to understand as well is like where we are today wasn't where we were before, and that, right? Like, I mean, I grew up with fax machines with the primary use of communication between offices, right? Like, we didn't have email every day. Like, that was like, to think that somebody would be sitting in front of a computer screen waiting to receive an email and do it back, or instant messaging, was crazy as a concept. That's not how you did business. And it's changed so much today. The way that they move money today is evolved significantly from where it used to be 100 years ago to 50 years ago to 20 years ago to today. So it would be pretty silly to think that it wouldn't take advantage of these efficiencies, and that's why they're talking about it publicly now. I think we're past the point of like it's for criminals and and all these use, and that was always like it was legit, right? Silk Road was a pretty legit use case for crypto.
All forms of money is for criminals. Right?
Well, that's the other thing, right? Like criminals are pretty smart. That's what makes them pretty savvy why they make money.
Yeah.
But the problem is in this world is that they eventually get caught, right? Because it's immutable, and so it's probably a bad thing to be using as a criminal. We're past all of that. The thing that this will ultimately do for the big organizations is it's going to introduce speed. And I don't mean like what we call in the crypto thing like TPS, like how fast is your blockchain.
Yeah.
That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Realistically, it's irrelevant relative to the universe today.
Whereas if you've got like 10 containers sitting in a port and you're waiting 90 days versus 90 minutes, that's speed.
That's speed, yeah, that's right. So there's a relative reference point is what I'm trying to make is if you can make money move faster, actually move faster, settlement, which is what they have out of the gate with these chains, you've got instant settlement, instant change of the ledger, because you've solved the double spend all the way back to Bitcoin. You've introduced that, you're moving money faster. What happens if you move money faster? Well, more commerce is conducted around the world, and you've then connected the world again, even beyond what we even understand today to be sort of globalization. Is the economy will grow as a function of it. I mean, Scott Besson is no fool, right? It's why he's so bullish on stablecoins, net buyers of T-bills and what have you. But the reality is, well, one, it embeds the US dollar, which is part of the incentive, but it's not just that. It's like this can increase, economic output for our country and other countries that are wanting to do business with us. That's going to grow GDP. There's a net good technology being unlocked here, and even if the only thing that crypto ever did is deliver stablecoins, it's not that bad an outcome. It's just that people don't really understand what the value is yet because we haven't got mass adoption, and that is going to be happening at a pretty quick pace. And it's not going to be a massive lift for these companies to do it.
And look, I think the kind of, the intent of the question around fiat and, hey, is that where the friction is caused? Like for me, I think it is, right? Like the fact that you kind of have to keep converting to fiat. Whereas, the analogy I would give you is, energy, right? Electricity. So if anybody's used Amber, you can store energy from solar, goes into your battery, you can send it back to the grid and you get paid, right? And you get paid in money. Well, to be honest, I don't really want the money, I just want the energy.
You want the energy.
Right? So why are we converting in fiat or a currency when really the currency that I'm interested in is energy, right? And that to me is like where something like Ethereum comes in and a smart contract comes in, where you have a ledger of, hey, you've sent this much to the grid, hey, you need to take some back. Yeah, we're gonna, you can take that back. And these are kind of, for me, like where I see the technology in a 20, 30, 50 year kind of time horizon, is that it's beyond, it's like if we were talking about in-home entertainment now, we'd be getting super excited that we didn't have to put a tape into something and rewind it, right? Yeah, and we could press a button and it would rewind it like 10 times the speed, right? In a disc, and you could put, you could pour water on the disc and it would still play. We'd be like, wow, that is incredible.
That's literally the ads. Look, I think it's interesting. I think the analogy of solar is pretty interesting as well, right? Sun's up for X amount of hours a day. Well, that's kind of how the financial system works too. What happens when it's dark? Like you're not allowed to watch TV or Netflix or whatever you're doing, or rewind your videos. Now there are solutions in place, but they're quite limited, right? So you can't go into a bank branch and take out more money than you normally take out in a day. Like you're kind of limited. You've got a bunch of rules, and if you want to resolve those, you have to wait till tomorrow. That just changes with all of this, right? Like there are rules and they're codified, but as the world spins, there is no notion of what is the time. The time is now relative to where you are. The time isn't after hours. The time isn't 5 p.m. Australia. It's not 6 a.m. New York. It is now. And on a UTC sort of time base, the world will conduct commerce, and it's the time to transfer is the limitation of the blocks and the speed and settlement of the chain, and that happens really, really quickly. And it just makes sense that we'll see the adoption. I think you mentioned before the ATO. Look, I think they're pretty clever, to be quite frank. I've watched a couple of events where the ATO have gone and done sort of like, sort of recruitment drives.
Yeah.
They're like, there's a bit of a brains trust going on. Like, I actually felt pretty proud to be an Australian as well by seeing the ATO talk about this tech, including crypto, and I was kind of like, good on them. Like they've spent the time learning.
Yeah.
They're not scared of it. They understand it, and they see the benefits of it. And again, what does it do for them? Speeds up money.
Yeah.
You know what the benefit of speeding up money is? Collecting, taxes from Australians and then getting them back to where they need to go to be deployed into, capital projects. And so there's value in what they've seen in the technology, and they've not looked at it from a fear perspective or a policy perspective. It's like, we think this could be good in doing what we do and facilitating that, sort of transfer, of people to funding, government. And it's like, that's a good example, and I think we need to see more of that.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about Pier 2 itself and just the business and kind of the journey you guys have been on, because, I think one of the fintech is tough. Crypto is like, it's champagne, as we say in recruitment, champagne and razor blades, right? You're either up there or you're down there.
Yep.
How have you guys kind of kept true to the mission, the vision? And what have been the things that have just kind of kept you going through that? Because you've been, you're always out there. You're always kind of putting on a positive face, even in the midst of fairly bleak times. What's been the secret for you guys?
Look, I think it comes back to the mission for our business, but then also sort of alignment to like what are we here for? What are we doing? What do we believe in? We think there's just a better outcome through this technology for the majority of all the people around the world, the whole world, not just here in Australia or in Brisbane or wherever else, like the whole world. And so for us, and this is one of the first times ever that this has been available to companies without having to go get a job for a particular company, in that we can contribute to these blockchains and this technology and its adoption without anyone to say that we can or can't.
Yeah.
So we can start a company, we can use that technology, we can advance that technology, we can contribute to some of the breakthroughs in R&D, and then we can take that message out and give people access to that institutionally. That's pretty unique. Before that, it was sort of R&D departments of particular companies or government grants to universities to conduct it and sort of do these things. And so that's a huge unlock. So for us, we feel pretty good about the fact that opportunity exists in this period of time, because it hasn't existed before. So being alive right now is pretty good. So you can take optimism from that alone. Best time to be alive ever. And so that's one of the benefits. In terms of what motivates us, even in the downtimes, I think that North Star of sort of keeping there, and I think as the business has changed its focus, from when we started in 2018 to where we are today, it has changed. But like at the end of the day, it's serving our customers, being honest about what we're doing, own any mistakes if we ever make any, being transparent around that, driving great outcomes for customers, like an obsession around that, obsession around security, that's pretty much top of mind. And at the end of the day, it's a trust-based industry and technology. And so for us, we have to maintain that. At the end of the day is like, could you trust us as your partner in delivering these services with this technology that ultimately is trustlessness? But all of those things sort of are compounding in effect. And so we turn up, we keep turning up. We've been turning up for years and years and years, and through the good times, the bad times. And I think you get humbled in the markets for sure, and not losing your head, when times are good, usually is a function of companies that have seen what it's like on both sides, right? So we have that benefit, and so we keep ourselves pretty honest. A lot of our customers have been sort of multi-cycle too, so that's helpful because they have a level head on their own, which is pretty cool. And so I think for us, we know that there's a point where this technology becomes so adopted and just infiltrates every single system where it helps.
Ubiquitous, I think, is the term everybody uses on panels.
Well, you can subscribe to all double click on that. So you can call it ubiquitous. And look, at the end of the day, it kind of is. But I guess it's not going to be without its friction. You mentioned the Kodaks
Yeah.
and all the other companies that have come and gone in the past. Look, some people aren't going to make it. They're not going to get through this as a company because the incentives or the executives are incentivized to keep their market share, slow down, leakage to these other technologies. And so whilst the executive, incentives are aligned to their pay being to slow what's happening on the external side as opposed to adopting to growth and getting to the other side, there will be victims. Now,
I think it's a really interesting point actually, because I think this is one of the paradoxes of being a disruptor, right, and being an early stage business. If your ambition is to become number one in the world, you eventually end up becoming the very thing that you set up to destroy, behaving exactly the same way, and your downfall will be exactly the same way that the person that you've replaced, right? And we talked about this before with the knock your apple thing, right? And I think it's just this inevitable cycle, and it's kind of, I think you have to kind of go, okay, do we want to be real innovators and kind of pushing ahead, or do we want to be number one? Because those two things are completely different things.
Look, they are, and I think, look at, we talked about AI before and where Apple might have sort of misstepped, and you'd probably give Apple a chance at doing something significant.
I'm not writing them off, right? But it's kind of, they
got a bit of cash in the bank. They got the $bucks.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is most interesting to observe at this particular point is watching what Zuckerberg is doing at Meta around AI. The scale of the compensation he's offering people to leave great positions with huge equity in those other sure thing AI companies, to jump ship, abandon everything, join him and build it. It is obscene. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in the world. Now, why would you do it? He's betting the house, and he's betting the house for good reasons. He sees things before a lot of people see them. Whether he sees them through just intuits it, or he uses third-party VPN software apps on things to monitor things. It's a different sort of ruling. But
let's go with the latter.
But the thing that I find really interesting is he's aligning the incentives to where they want to end up being, and I think there's a lesson in that. Is will they be successful is the first question, and then if they are successful, what drove that success? I think that aggression towards, and again, it comes from leadership, right? He is deciding where you need to be in order to get the company into the future. And if you're not on board with that, he's not saying, I need to add revenue to basically subsidize this whole business model forever. And so if you got to do, more rounds of of be on Madison Avenue and tell the story. No, so AI is the future. There'll be a model around this that we'll commercialize at some point in some way, shape or form. And we've got to be there first or amongst the first. We can't wait. The cost of waiting is, being completely redundant, and you'll be remembered in the history books like the others we talked about. And so there's a lesson in that. And it's not to say that that's where big financial institutions are sort of today relative to crypto. I don't think the tech is moving quite as fast as where AI is, or is quite as significant. But I think the lift and the challenge for their business to incorporate it is relatively small compared to, it's more of an iterative process as opposed to fundamentally. Now, what will AI do after this? Well, I think this is where people are going to start to realize that crypto permissioned access and controls, quantum resistance as well, which is something that they're obviously working on, and that sort of goes sort of unsaid in this technology, is they've always talked about and thought about this stuff being so forward-looking. But you have sort of permission-based, quantum-resistant infrastructure that you can apply. Well, that might be the last line of defense against AI if it runs away a little bit, right? So these are the sorts of things we need to be thinking about and talking about. Is there is a technology here. There's some dog coins and crazy things that people talk about, and there's some value in people trading it. Some people are treating it like a casino. Other people are treating it like really valuable investment that they see in the long term. And there's a nuance. There's a difference. But behind all of that, in the same tech, is this capacity to protect people, to give people their privacy back, to give it some integrity, to make that something that the rest of the world can have, not just wealthy countries. There is a lot of benefits in this that can serve a pretty large audience, and I think that's important. And that's, at the end of the day, we're serving a fairly minor role in all of this, but that's why we do it. We're pretty passionate about the world can have a better outcome if we do the work. And while we might get ignored and laughed at in the early days, it's going to happen. They're going to be using it. And while we probably never get a thank you at any point, with all the R&D and core devs that have done all this hard work over all these years, they'll be happy knowing that they did something positive to have a net good impact on the world, and you feel good about that. There's a lot of jobs where you go and don't necessarily feel so good about what you're doing, and this is one where you actually feel like you are doing something good, and whether everyone agrees on that is sometimes irrelevant.
And you touched on Zuck before offering 100 million to people to join the business.
It's more than that.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming you don't have 100 million to offer people to join Pier 2. So what are the things that you look for in people when you are hiring, and kind of if there are people out there who are listening that might be interested in finding out more about kind of careers at Pier 2, like what could you say to them about the benefits of being with you guys?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think before I talk about benefits, it's sort of like what do we look for in people as what makes somebody a fit within our business. And it's hard. Like, it's actually really hard to recruit for our company and other companies like us, and we're looking globally too. So it's like the talent pool is so minor that even on a global basis, it's hard to find the right people that want to sort of take on the alignment. Look, curiosity is probably one of the most important features, and that's going to be, like, honestly, curiosity as just something that you possess as a skill, or an unlock it at an individual human level. You need that if you're going to survive the AI wall that'll eventually hit like a tsunami. That's going to be one thing that's going to serve you well, right? So, like, curiosity is a core differentiator for successful people within companies or independently. So that's a feature, is because every day we wake up and something new is happening, something new is changing. The technology is evolving so quickly that unless you're curious, you won't keep up, because you just don't care about what's new and change. And so that's an important part. And then the other thing is, I call it hustle. Other people call it different things, but just turning up. There are a lot of people who don't turn up. I've worked at some big companies and watched a bunch of things, and I won't name which company, but I remember when I started at one company, I was pretty excited to join and work there. And 5 to 5 in the afternoon, the elevators, there was a huge lineup around the elevators. And it was my first week, obviously, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I watched it, and then the second day, the same thing happened, and then the third day, I went to my boss, I'm like, why is everyone lining up? Is there like a fire drill or something? She goes, no, it's 5 o'clock. I'm like, what happens at 5 o'clock? She goes, nothing. That's when it's the earliest they can go home. And I'm like, this is the biggest mistake of my life. Like, what am I doing here? This is not a place for me. I stayed longer than I probably should have, but because there were some great people that didn't do that, right? And they were who I was motivated to work with and do cool things with. But that is a fairly normal occurrence. People like the work from home stuff, like we can beat up on all of that, and I'm not interested in that. Most of us work remotely because that's just a function of our team. The thing that's interesting though is turning up is a mindset. And so you need to do that in this industry. It doesn't matter, and you'll get caught out really quick, because it's sort of like the how did Genghis Khan conquer the world? He had the fastest horses. You need the fastest horses, and so if you've got people who are slow and taking...
He was also a bit crazy as well.
He was very, very crazy, but we still talk about him. So and I think that fastest horse is a good analogy, because in our space there is just too much to do. You can't do it all, and so what do you prioritize? How do you choose? Curious, people with hustle, not sales, and I'm talking full engineering, everything, right? Like, we got engineers that hustle, like, as in they go and find out new specs on new machines, and they test stuff out, and they ship this stuff as quickly as they can, and they iterate on it, and they want to do it better. It's like that hustle that's a pretty inspiring part of it. And so as a culture, when you've got, and people talk about like A players and all this stuff, and like, I think that's all bullshit, quite frankly. The thing that I think
I think it's kind of, you've got to be descriptive about what is an A player for your business and what do they look like.
Right, and even categorizing people.
Yeah, and like, you said hustle, and then you back that up with, here is an example of what we define as hustle,
That's right.
You do all of these things.
That's right.
And I think that's ultimately, using those words is great, but you have to have the context behind them.
That's right.
This is...
Well, and if you've got people who are naturally curious and they have a degree of hustle, then it's contagious.
And they're not dickheads, right?
Well,
I think
that helps.
You know what? You've nailed what I say to everybody though. Like, it is simple, right? If you can take the time to figure out what are the things that have worked and the behaviors and the traits and the qualities, and what does that mean in terms of examples.
Yeah.
Once you figure that out and you get that uniform and everybody agrees, hiring does become easier. It's not easy, but it's kind of, it's a simple process.
Right.
It's made harder by the fact that people make up their own minds, so you can find the right person
Right,
and they
right.
go,
Then
that's what you're not right for me, right?
Like, yeah, and that's exactly right. And so I think for us it's contagious, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got good people with all of those traits and they come into the business, then people get motivated by working. Like, people really love working with other smart people and high performers.
Yeah.
There is something about that energy that it inspires you to do the work.
Yeah.
It makes you feel like a team. And when somebody needs help, you run to volunteer to help, and that, like, being part of something like that feels pretty cool. And I've been part of that as teams in big companies before. This feels like a pretty good place to be because we've had that. We've been able to maintain that. Is like the team comes together when something needs to be done or needs to be done fast. We rally, we come together, and there's something pretty. And people are proud of that.
Yeah.
And people hang around for a long time. Like, our retention is good, and I think that's probably one of the secrets to it, in terms of how we look for people or how we sort of bring them in. Like that. Look, that's pretty hard, because not only do we need to have them have all those traits, we have to have them have some experience, be very technically savvy in terms of what they're doing on our side. Most of our team are like sort of DevOps, engineers. Like, more than 75% of our team is that sort of background, and they have to be based in certain regions around the world for us to maintain sort of how we've designed our infrastructure to be 24/7. And then they've got to be crypto curious or crypto knowledgeable, and so we're looking for this really rare diamond in the world. Now, you'd be surprised how many people know a little bit and then can learn really quickly, because again, curiosity helps and hustle helps, and so people have come on and onboarded themselves pretty quickly in certain areas, and other people have just come in and just super smart, so can just consume and absorb information faster than others and retain it and and recall it much better, and they're just pretty special people to work with. And so look, the talent field is rare, and it's hard to get, but what we can do in the interim is build a reputation on trust, and build a reputation as a great place to work, of a team that does good things, is honest about what we do, and turns up every day and does a better job tomorrow than we did yesterday. And that, if you keep doing that for long enough, people start to say, oh, that's kind of cool, I wouldn't mind working there.
Now, last question for you. At the beginning of the conversation, I talked about this kind of imminent collision between DeFi and TradFi. We got a lot of kind of TradFi people listen to the show. We got a lot of people in fintech who kind of are very much having conversations about stable coins and the technology as well. One of the key reasons I wanted to bring you on the show is, I think one of the challenges I've found is that they kind of, to speak to people, or for them to hear from people who not just credible, but I think kind of talk their language and aren't doing the overhype and they kind of all of that stuff. And you've obviously presented a really great case as to the benefits of the technology and where it's heading. If there's anybody who's listening who thinks, hey, I'd really like to find out more about this and kind of could be something that we could use in our business, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I mean, we're pretty active on LinkedIn, so we have a profile there. Anything that sort of comes through there hits us. We have a pretty active profile on X as well, Twitter. So DMing on either of those platforms is fine. They can reach me on Jake at Pier2.com as well. Hit me direct.
And careers-wise, same thing? people are thinking, hey,
yeah, look, I mean,
what you've shared,
absolutely.
Look,
Look, we're always like, sometimes talent turns up not when you're looking,
Yeah.
and sometimes jobs emerge when talent's not looking, and getting that timing right is sometimes a hard thing. And so knowing who's around, who's on the bench.
It's all about building relationships.
Well,
as
I think
right?
that's what I call it, the bench.
Right.
And a guy I used to work with who scaled some cool companies together was having the bench. Like, who do you call if this thing emerges?
Yeah.
You got to know who that is for that particular role, and there'll be weird roles that you think in your mind, oh, this might exist one day. Who am I going to call on that? You've got to build sort of a mental map around that and a network around it. So, look, we're always open to that, and I think I think people have got to stay curious. Like, how do they keep up to date, and how do they sort of stay ahead of the curve? It's like there isn't a single day that goes by that I'm reading something on a subject that I didn't know enough about, or listening to some podcast and getting some update. And there's a difference between sort of like news. So there's plenty of things where it's like, what happened yesterday in this market, and people talk about the price of Bitcoin. Zero people are going to go back and look at what happened on the 25th of July 2025 to the price of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it was nothing of significance. The thing that's going to matter is like, what was the upgrade or the roadmap discussed here, and what does it mean, and what are the theoretical applications of that in all of these other industries that can be adopted, is, I think, finding that. And so there are things like Blockworks do, Bell Curve, Empire, Forward Guidance, you've got some macroeconomic stuff, you've got some what's happening in the market summaries, you've got some theoretical, examples of what can be happening there. Bankless do a pretty good job as well, particularly they get really good guests. And so if you're looking at sort of the expertise of their guests, and the guys are really good at asking questions, there's some pretty cool stuff there. Domestically, in Australia, Crypto Curious does sort of a good sort of up-to-date with the news. It's pretty snappy. The Jelly Sea guys are doing a pretty good job with unblocking the chain and getting pretty deep on more of like an investment level of practical, like, what could this unlock? And so there are different things like that are out there, and they're free, right? Like, that's the cool thing about all this. It's free to access, and you can listen to it while you're on a treadmill, or cleaning the house, or mowing the lawns, or doing whatever. And that if you just did that, like, that compounds. So you don't go from knowing nothing or being scared of what this could mean to like being a bit more like, oh, I think I kind of understand what happens, and you will be overwhelmed at the beginning, and then once you get to that point, the conversations change, your understanding changes, and a lot of the sort of vernacular we use in the space is might be a little over your head initially, but eventually you start to sort of put it together, and you're like, oh, well, that means this. Like, why don't you just use the word that's more familiar? And you get better at sort of disseminating what they're saying, and at that point, it all becomes so clear, and you're ready. And so I think and you have to do that in any technology. In every company I've ever worked with, in any technology that I've ever sort of come up against, you just had to do the work. You had to do the work, and that's like anything, right? Like, you're not going to be able to do anything performant, sports filled, unless you do the training and you do the work and you stay fit. It's the same thing mentally, and if people don't do it, they can't expect. And it's not just crypto. Like, now you also have to factor in the AI part too, because while you might know a lot about crypto, AI is going to come fill that job too. And so, what's your edge in like knowing some crypto stuff, but then being able to use the AI tools too? So like, I'm worried about what the future of contributing to the economy looks like. I don't even know if we'll call them jobs in the future necessarily, but like, what does that mean? How is it measured, and how does it get compensated? You've just got to be ready for what might come. And I'm not doomsday prepping on this by any means. I'm just saying, like, if you didn't sort of learn email and Google and all of these things in some basic function in your job, and you just stayed on a landline and fax, probably not working, or you're the boss. That's it. And so keep up if you want to be a contributing individual in the future society with the speed of where tech's going. Is you can no longer just bury your head. It's just, you've got to make little incremental moves to sort of keep a pace. And crypto's one part of the field, but it's a broader sort of ecosystem now. But the internet is evolving to be quite big. That incorporates AI and crypto and all these other things. And you just have to take a view that these things are all going to matter. And if someone says you're not allowed to do it, or it's bad, or somebody says it's used by criminals, and all of these things, it's like, we'll take that with a grain of salt, because so is everything else.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, agree. Well, it's been fantastic to have you on, Jake. Thanks for sharing your insights as well. As always, folks, If you enjoyed the show, make sure you give us a share on your favorite social networks. If you are new, give us a follow and a subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave us a comment as well. We really love all your comments and feedback. Until the next episode, keep well.